Good. All right. So it's Mars's turn today. And again, we're really just fine tuning what we already know. So there's no new techniques. It's more about learning how McCormack did the forecasting. And so we start with this is what we're going to look at, weather facts, which mostly come from McCormack's notes book. Then there's the Mars combination signatures, which I've sent you, and which you can just, that's for self-study again, which you can put into your signature files. And then Mars, there's MJ. Mars is associated with fires. Always, it's the signature planet for major fire. It's also the signature planet for drought. And then, and we're going to look at McCormack examples in fires and in droughts. And then there's 3 more Mars examples, which we're going to be looking at. Okay, so in terms of describing Mars in weather, McCormack said Mars was a celestial spark plug that ignites Mother Nature's engines. So you get an idea of the dynamism. When Mars comes along, you must take notice of what it's doing. If it's angular, if it's triggering angles, if it's triggering other planets, it's really important to notice. It's the red ray of the solar spectrum, and it's also positive electricity. Keywords for Mars: turbulence, disruption. It brings energy, it brings penetration, and it brings rapid action. So, you know, as he said, it's the spark plug. It brings change. And it signals evaporation. It has a naturally drying instinct because of its heat. It's associated with westerly winds, which are the normal direction, and it's associated with rising temperatures. So if you are trying to find a weather date, a wedding date in winter, then you're going to be looking for Mars to be warming the temperature, but you've got to just be careful that it's not doing too much else that's destructive. Might probably be better to look for some of the other planets that warm the weather. But yeah, Mars will definitely raise the temperature. Okay, so our combo, Mars planet combo signatures, again, that's self-study. If you've got questions, you can shout via our WhatsApp group, or, you know, write directly to me, but it should all be pretty clear enough. All right, so here we go. We are looking at high temperatures associated with Mars. So what McCormack said, he was looking at in the Northern Hemisphere, and as I said before, he liked to stay on around about 40 degrees latitude, 40 degrees north latitude, which is New York and like Boulder, Colorado, and, you know, there's a whole lot of towns that lie across that 40 latitude. Anyway, so it was this, I think because he was based around New York, he actually worked for the Bell Engineering Company in New York City. And I think he lived somewhere close by. So the Northern Hemisphere, summer of July 1936. Mars was at the maximum north declination. And honestly, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to always check your declination. There's so much weather information there. Okay, so Mars was maximum north in the month of July, and on the 9th of July 1936, New York City had an all-time record high temp of 40 degrees Celsius or 103 Fahrenheit. You know, 40 is what you get in India and in some of the very hotter parts of South Africa. 40 is not a common temperature for New York City. So, and then another little mention that I wanted to make here, this is Rhode Island, and Carolyn Egan, who's also had a lot of influence on this course. She was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and I think she lived a bit closer to the coast for most of her life. So just to mention while we're in this vicinity. All right, so it's as simple as that. If you see Mars maximum north in the northern summer, or if you see Mars maximum south declination in the southern summer, we're heading for our southern summer here. If Mars starts to head for maximum declination, expect a hotter summer than normal. And that's what he would have forecast. He would have seen it there and he would have said hotter than normal for the summer. And then he was showing the proof of it, that they'd had this record-breaking day in July. All right, here we're looking at fires. We're staying in the Northern Hemisphere. It's now July 1938. Again, it's the summertime when it's, at the warmest it's going to be for this part of the world. Mars was again at maximum north declination. And on the 24th of July, transiting Sun was conjunct transiting Mars. And we would find that in our lunar quarter report. And that's why I say, that's why for your homework, for your assignments, I'm giving you the lunar quarters to go through 3 at a time, 2 at a time. So by the end of the course, you will have worked through all of those and then you put it all together. So it's not going to be a mountain of work at the end where you need to be handing in your seasonal forecast, because you're going to be focusing in on each quarter at a time. So in July of 1938, forest fires destroyed huge amounts of forest in Washington State. So this is Washington State here. Vancouver Island, which is in British Columbia. So this whole area, and I mean, you can see the green here, okay. So this whole area here got huge tracts got burnt, and then it was followed by drought. And interestingly enough, the official meteorologists blamed campers for these fires, but McCormack, based on that, Mars at max north declination, based on the transiting Sun conjunct, I remember the conjunct, how terribly important, conjunct transiting Mars, he had said that the fires were going to be self-combusting. And by that, he said he would, when he predicted this, he said he would go into the forest and he would see that the fires ignited at the top of the trees, where no campers go. So the Daily News in Washington, D.C., on the 26th of July, quoted McCormack and said, look, the campers were not to blame. I know even when we had the garden route fires, people were saying they're setting the fires, they're setting the fires. But very often there is the self-ignition, especially if there's an existing fire burning and the temperatures get huge. Then the rest, this fynbos, which is where I live, has many volatile oils, and literally those things can self-ignite because the sap is boiling in the trees and just gets so hot and the thing blasts into flame. So yeah, that was his fire example. I did work through the fires in the garden route, but there simply wasn't time for me to put it into this lecture. And I did a whole exercise, So what I'll do towards the end of the course, if there's time, I prepared it for the presentation to the Cape Astrology Association. And then I had to cut most of the examples out because I would have had everybody there for 2 hours and not 1. So I just have to whip it into, but I thought this was pretty beautifully done. And I was doing it retrospectively. He's showing how you do it. in advance, which is what we're aiming to do. We're aiming to forecast this stuff. Right, so our drought example is a fascinating one. It's the Great Dust Bowl, 1934 to 1939, the great drought of the Great Plains of America. It was a monumental thing that happened there. So the first thing that we're going to look at, we are looking here for the year 1934, which is when it began. And so here we have Mars for the whole year. And so you can see in a given year, Mars, it's actually more than 1 year that Mars takes to do its full cycle, because it hasn't returned back down here yet. But you can see that July of 1934, in the Northern Hemisphere, which is the northern summer, Mars is at maximum declination yet again. So for, because there's other examples I think were 36 and 38, so that we had this repetition of the Mars in the northern summer at the maximum north. So this is something to watch out for if we see that in our declinations. And then what I did is I've plotted the perigee moon with a blue dot, because I didn't want to smush this. It's a lot of months on one little page. So I looked up, what I did is I had the dates, I moved my mousey over these moon declinations, and I got the actual date and I popped a blue dot on there. And what he wanted us to notice was that the perigee moon, which is when the moon is closest to Earth, coincided with the moon being in the southern declination. So when moon is closest to Earth, because that perigee happens once a month. And so for the entire year, the perigee happened in the southern hemisphere. And, at certain times it was pretty close to the moon being at max declination. And it is heading quite far out, because there's 25. There's our celestial eclipse as per normal. And here is 25, and then 26, 27. So at this moment, the moon is actually like 26, 27. And we know from our moon lecture that the max the moon goes to is 28. But we also know, so I think it's coming off, because if you look at the end here, it's kind of lifting up slowly. So that max is probably a little bit earlier than this, in the previous year possibly. But when you have the perigee moon with the moon at max southern declination, the bulk of the rain is going to be falling in the southern hemisphere. So what happened, if the bulk of the rain of the world is drawn into the southern hemisphere, then you're going to have the possibility of a drought in the northern hemisphere. So I also thought that was I love his mind. I love his thinking. There is so much we can learn from him. And if you want to get his book, get his book. Most of his book I have put into the notes in my own way. He didn't provide things like declination charts. He calculated all the stuff by hand. So I have taken his examples and put the solar fire to it, so that we can learn what we're going to be looking at in our solar fire declinations, lunar quarters, event reports. Okay, so what I've got here, I've got Oklahoma City, because he was a great one for getting the longitude. He would look across that whole North America and find the longitude where things were going to happen. Right, so this is Oklahoma City, which is 97 west, 35 north, so not quite on his 40 degree. He's come a little bit down. But I came down because the Dust Bowl happened around Oklahoma, and we're going to see, I've got a map to show you where the Dust Bowl happened across 12 states, I think. We'll see soon. So what he wants us to notice here, first of all, we have got Mars in this lunar quarter. We've got Mars applying to the sun. It's not going to get there in the quarter because Mars at most is going to move half a degree a day. So half a degree a day is 3.5 degrees, going to get to like 13.5. But you must start to anticipate that Mars is going to conjoin the sun. And those are two hot planets together. So that you've got to be alert for fire or drought. And Mercury, which moves roughly 1 degree a day, that is also headed A for Mars and B for the sun. It's not going to get there in this quarter, but I'm showing you the progression. So you're going to see this, and then you must then go and look further and trace it through your lunars. So at the moment, we're doing one at a time, but when you come to doing the seasonal, you've got to trace the development from one lunar quarter to the next, Okay, and your time map's also going to provide you with that, your actual report, not your time map, your actual event report. Remember, for our lunar quarters, we do a transits to the IC and the ascendant of our lunar quarter chart itself, and then we do detailed transit to transit for those 8 days. Both of those reports for the 8 days, we merge them. And we also put the declination of the parallel of declination. Don't do the parallel of latitude, do the parallel of declination. And then in your report, you have a reminder of what's happening on your declination for the month. And like if you're doing a wedding or something, you can see the exact time because that's important as well, particularly with the moon. So, you can either utilize it for your wedding time period, or you can avoid it if it's something that's raining. So yeah, that needs to be in. And then the other thing to notice is that Saturn at 27 degrees of Aquarius is applying to Uranus by sextile at 28 degrees of Aries. And like we said right at the beginning, when you've got two violent planets, which we have here, we have stormy Saturn and we have record-breaking Uranus. So they can override that sextile and bring some hectic stormy weather, even if it's a sextile. Okay. Right, so that's our first one. And then we draw this to see. So on the 8th of May, we have Mercury conjunct Saturn. Again, when we're doing our seasonal, we're going for the conjunctions, we're going for the parallels. And notice that 1 day later, we have the Mercury parallel Mars as well. So we have to take notice of it, and we can go and look up in our combo to see what, but basically it's wind and the fiery heat. It's in the earthy sign of Taurus, and Taurus does have an effect, it's a very earthy sign. So watch that. Okay, now when you do declination, here you can see they're both at plus 15. Plus 15 means that they are both 15 degrees north declination. The pluses are north, the minuses are south. And position 1 here relates to planet 1, position 2 relates to planet 2. Okay, so if you've got a conjunction, no problem, and a parallel, they're both the same. But when you're talking squares or contraparallels, then you will, so just, if we can take any funny, we haven't got conjunction. To get it all in on one screen, I only put conjunction. You, of course, will have a longer report in your lunar quarters. But highlight, underline, mark up. I'm a great one for marking up my weather reports. Right, the next thing we notice, we've got Sun conjunct the IC on the 9th of May. The IC has Taurus there. And then we have Mercury conjunct the IC on the 11th of May. And then we have Sun parallel Mercury on the 12th of May. So there's a repetition. No. Sorry. We've got the parallel first. No, we haven't got Sun conjunct Mercury, but we've got when it's not the moon, we must notice it. So, and Sun is heat and Mercury is wind. So the wind plays a part both in drought, and because the wind will exacerbate the drought, will cause these horrendous dust storms or desert sandstorms. And the wind will for sure exacerbate a big fire. It will drive that fire. Here in the garden, it drove the fire from down the road from me all the way to Port Elizabeth in 2017. And in 2018, it drove it from George all the way over 3 sets of Cape Fold mountains, because there's 3 mountain ranges that make the Cape Folds, all the way to Uniondale in the Karoo. So, the wind is huge with the Mars thing. Then we had a moon conjunct Mars on the 12th and a sun conjunct Mercury on the 12th. Right. So we'll look just now at what actually happened. I just wanted to show you the states. So the states, these weren't the 12. The 12 was something else. Okay. So it's Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, and New Mexico. And the slang for the people who fled this dust bowl because they couldn't feed themselves, they were farmers, became Okies. And it was a pretty derogatory thing, and they weren't very sympathetic to the poor old Okies. Right, so what actually happened? On the 9th of May, 1934, 5.4 million kilograms, or 12 million pounds of dust. That is a gigantic amount of dust. It was deposited in Chicago. And black blizzards reduced the visibility to less than a meter. So this was disastrous stuff. And then the storms also sent dust clouds as far east as Washington, D.C. and New York City. That was the 9th. And when the sand was deposited, it buried the cars. They had to shovel the sand like snow. Right, so then on the 11th of May, 1934, that's only 2 days later, there was a massive dust storm. It was 3 kilometers high. That is massive, 2 miles high. It traveled 3,000 kilometers or 2,000 miles before it reached the East Coast. So it blew out of that dust bowl all the way to New York. Washington, D.C. is not quite at the coast, but it's pretty close to New York City, a little bit south of New York City. And in New York City, the dust created a fog that blotted out the Statue of Liberty for 5 hours. Similarly, there was another dust fog in Washington, D.C., and they couldn't see any of the big structures there. And then in the winter, so this is summer, okay? This is the early summer, well, actually late spring, because our ingress for summer is June. And then the winter of 1934, 1935, so that's our December ingress, our December Capricorn ingress in the north. And so the winter would be December, Jan, Feb, and March up until the spring ingress. And the snow in New England was red from the dust that had blown out of the dust bowl. Yeah, so here I'm showing you New England, basically. New England is a northeastern region of the United States, because us here in South Africa, I'm sure MJ knows the stuff, but we don't know what New England is. So New England consists of the state of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So it's basically this chunk.
Yeah, okay. if you in the top right corner, you can just see a tiny bit of New Brunswick, which is our next door neighbor province. So yeah, we're very close to them here.
Okay, cool. Right, so So that whole area, when it snowed in winter here, the snow was red. Right, so I put a lot more interesting stuff in your notes for you to read up about the history. I'm not actually teaching you guys history, so we won't emphasize it, but I found it absolutely fascinating. Right, so we are heading forth to another example. I've called it example 1 because now we will wait and see what happens. Okay, so here we are in New York City, which is 74 west and 40 north. We are on the 22nd of June, 1923, summer solar ingress. Okay, so what does he want us to notice? He wants us to notice that Saturn is in the IC. And he wants us to notice that Mercury and Venus and the Sun, they all move 1 degree a day. They are all heading for Neptune, as is Mars over here, heading for Neptune. And he didn't pay much attention to Pluto, but these 3 planets, before they get to Neptune, they are going to conjoin with Pluto. So even though these planets are not in, so here's another clue for us. Even if the planets aren't in those angles, but they're heading towards, because this is a pattern here. This is a great big pattern. So you've got to notice this, because in each lunation, the angles are different. So for sure here, we must say it could be a colder summer. Okay, we must notice that. And Saturn's in Libra, and Libra is also windy, so we could have storms. Saturn's a stormy planet. It's stormy Saturn. So yeah, and just to sort of hold on to that, you know, that we need to remember there's more to it than just the way I taught you. This is now taking it to the next level. We've got to think ahead. Okay, so we notice that this is our declination for July 1923. And what I wanted to tell everybody is those declination maps you have in your file, they apply to the whole world. Because literally the vantage point is you're sitting on the equator and you're looking to see where are the planets relative to that equator. And it's the same for everywhere on the planet. So you don't have to draw up a different declination. I've tested it. I didn't read this anywhere. I just simply tested it there, and it makes logical sense to me. Okay, right. So you want to notice that there's a bunch up here, as Karen and Egan like to call it, a traffic jam. There's a snarl up here. And it's Northern Hemisphere. And McCormack was Northern Hemisphere. So you must be alerted too. So even from your declination, if you now got inquisitive and you've got family overseas, then go and, you know, draw an ingress, draw some lunar quarters and see what this bunch up is going to bring if you see that in a declination. I didn't put in the celestial equator, but there it is over there at 0 degrees, just above Saturn. Saturn and Uranus are close. They're not in it, but they're close. So now we saw Saturn angular in our ingress, and we have Saturn fairly close. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees south. All right. So that is our July, and here is our August. So it's starting to widen up. That snarl up is improving a little bit. It's not quite so tightly bound, but there are a lot of crossings going on here and here. So, and we've got the moon coming in there at its max declination. Now notice here in 1923, the moon is round about 18. So this was when it was at minor lunar standstill, because remember our range is 18 to 28. So that's just another thing to bear in mind, and because that brings tidals. So yeah, there's a lot we can, I'm always astonished at how much we learn from the declination. All right, so this is just showing you pretty much all the states in the United States, because for this, he looked across the whole of the United States. Right, so in terms of transit and declination dynamics, he said that transiting Mars and transiting Venus, so he pulled those out. He said they were near the maximum north declination, both of them. Mars brings us the heat, Venus brings us the humidity. And this is summer. All right, in America. So our transit dynamics, we had transiting Mars and transiting Venus joining up with transiting Neptune. And then transiting Sun and transiting Mercury also joined up with transiting Neptune. So what that gave us was thunderstorms and freak weather. Yeah, I thought I'd put the dates in, but somehow I haven't put them in my slide. They might be in your notes. We shall wait and see. Possibly not. Okay, so the actual weather for summer of 1923, because remember our Neptune is freaky. Okay, so then our Sun and Mercury all join up with freaky Neptune. Right, so on the 17th of August, the newspapers in America reported that the summer of 1923 was intensely hot through the whole United States, and that there had been freak weather in nearly every American state, and that the droughts were of record intensity and the cloudbursts. You see, there's rain in Venus, and Neptune also is watery and so on. So cloudbursts and Mars, of course, brings the thunderstorms and all that kind of thing. I think the Sun can also bring on thunderstorms. Cloudbursts of record intensity, except in the extreme southwest, because in the extreme southwest of America, they had Saturn in the midheaven, and that moderated the heat, but an increased cloudiness, but an increased rain. So you can see it can be done at quite a simple level, but you can get amazing information. So you can know that when the country is going to have this super hot spell or super cold spell based on this information. Right, so now he tracks this because he can see these are extreme patterns he's looking at. So he's playing, and now he goes and he looks at Toulouse in France, which is 1 degree east. So he's gone all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. And this is what he sees. On the third quarter moon of 4th of August, we have Venus, the Sun, and Mars all applying to Neptune. This is the third quarter moon. Right, so here is our event chart, our dynamic events report. And on the 8th of August, we had the Sun conjunct Mars in fiery hot Leo. Then, so that's 2 hot planets in a hot sign. Be warned. We have our Mars sextile Saturn. And again, like I said before, we've got 2 violent planets. Mars and Saturn are diametrically opposed. Mars is hot and dry. Saturn is cold and wet, and they're both violent. So you get huge disrupted weather with Mars and Saturn. That happened on the 9th. And again, here, position planet 1 in position 1, Mars in 15 Leo, Saturn is in 15 Libra, which we know is windy. So we've got hot sign and a windy sign with these very disruptive malefics. Then on the 9th, we have the Sun opposing the ascendant. So the Sun is in Leo and the ascendant is 1554 of Aquarius. And on the 9th still, Mars opposed the ascendant. Again, Leo on the 7th, Aquarius on the ascendant. So what happened? In the summer of 1923, there was drought in Toulouse, France, and extremely high temperatures. And on the 9th of August, 1923, 44 degrees in the shade. That is seriously hot, or 111 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. So I can tell you, because I used to belong to Carolyn Egan's group of weather astrologers, they were not at all impressed by global warming, because they had gone back, they'd looked at this historic stuff, and hot temperatures have been with us for a while. It's not a new phenomenon. So, and as we go through this course, I suggest that that because the moon is heading out towards 28 degrees and it's pulling in more of that very, very icy polar weather in the clouds and bringing it here, we actually are in a cooling phase right the way from now until it comes back, more to like 23 degrees, which is probably like another few years. So I don't think that we are going to actually see these, that you get in headlines that say we're going to be dying of heat and all that, like the planet is burning up. This is just not true. So we'll see as we go through, and you can look for yourselves, and we're monitoring temperatures and so on. But here we go, 1923, 44 degrees in France. Right, and the sky reflected that. So he now takes the same chart and he tracks it to Scotts Bluff, which is in Nebraska, at 103 degrees west. Still on that same longitude, they're all about on that 40 longitude. And what does he see there? He sees Venus on the 7th house cusp, which by the 5-degree rule is in the 7th house. There's that whole bunch of planets in the 7th house. And he sees that Venus is applying to a square. Venus in Cancer, applying. So that's rainy, wet, 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 and it's a wet planet in a wet sign applying to stormy Saturn in windy Libra. And yes, Saturn's not in the 10th, but it's an important pattern. And the Venus, Venus is for sure angular. So let's have a look at what he wanted us to notice. Venus opposed that ascendant on the 21st of July. So we're looking at the 20th of July lunar quarter from Cancer. Capricorn on the ascendant is cold. Mars is parallel Pluto, storm and violence, destruction, turbulence and destruction. They are quite far north, 20 north, so they're near the maximum. That's on the 21st of July. We have Moon opposing the IC on the 21st of July in Scorpio, Moon in Scorpio, IC in Taurus. Venus, perfects that square with Saturn on the 21st of July. Venus, as we said, in rainy Cancer, moist Cancer. Saturn in windy Libra. And then there's the next lunar quarter. Now we see Saturn applying to Neptune. We see Mercury applying to Saturn, Mars applying to Saturn. We've got this whole bunch. They're getting closer and closer to that Neptune story. And the moon at 3 degrees in cold, with Aquarius, he likes to talk about crystallizing. So if it's winter time, then, he wants to have snow, basically. So we notice that the moon is in cold, crystallizing Aquarius. Nowhere near the angles. This is not near the angles, but these are giant patterns. Saturn is in an angle. So that moon obviously it's a full moon, okay, so it's going to oppose the sun. It is opposing the sun, that by definition, but after that, it's going to oppose Mars, oppose Mercury, oppose Neptune. So there's the disruption. There is the wind. There is the freaky. Okay, so we must notice that. And the moon is also going to trine. So its moon is Aquarius, Saturn is in Libra, so there's a trine through air, and this is a sextile from the Leo to the Libra. Right, next lunar quarter. Right, so here we have now Mars and the Sun are applying to cold Saturn in Libra. And remember, when we did the Sun, we said the big signature of cold is Sun, Saturn. This is a sextile, but it's Sun, Saturn. So you have to always remember, and that's why I did the blues, because we're looking. And then here we've got disruption, because Mars, as we said, is hot and dry, and Saturn is cold and wet, and they're both destructive. Right, so here we are going to be looking at what happened in Nebraska for the third quarter moon, starting 4th of August. On the 8th of August, we had Sun conjunct Mars in the sign of Leo. So that, we're going to want to say that's hot, but we also have Sun sextile Saturn, and that is cold. So that is Leo, Libra. And then Mars is going to sextile Saturn. That is on the 9th of August. That's Leo, Libra. And so Sun and Mars are going to sextile Saturn. And what's happened is the Sun has translated the Mars-Saturn sextile as well. So this is going to be something quite destructive. So what happened was they had from late July, now this is the middle of summer. Well, yeah, well, it's summer. Okay, we won't say it's the middle, but summer starts around about the 22nd of June. By late July, from late July, they had 2 weeks of cold and rainy weather. And on the 9th of July, which was that Mars-Saturn story, there was a flurry of snow in the height of summer. So we need to be alerted that Sun-Saturn is cold, and Mars-Saturn can bring destruction and something very different. So we might not have been able to predict snow, but you want to be predicting something disruptive. So if you just predicted something disruptive is going to happen around those 8-9 August, you would have got it. It would have been true. All right, on to example 2. We're in the Midwest of the USA. We're back in summer. We're now in 1928. We're in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is 111 degrees west, again on the 40 north. So what do we notice? This is a lunar quarter, the full moon of the 2nd July. We have Mars applying to Jupiter in earthy Taurus. And we have Sun, and Taurus is ruled by Venus, which is in the 7th house in rainy Cancer. We've got the Sun in Cancer and Pluto there, and those two planets are applying to Pluto. We have the moon in Capricorn, which is cold, in the 1st house. Right. And the Lord of the 10th house is in the 4th house. Right, so what I wanted to show you here was, this is North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Minnesota. So the Midwest is all these states. That was the 12. North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. Those are the Midwest. If you don't know that, don't feel alone. I didn't know it either. I had to go and look it up. So there was a heat wave over the American Midwest. He had forecast that, okay, in early July 1928. And it was followed by storms of tornado intensity in both North and South Dakota. See, Salt Lake City is over here. like off the map, because there's Colorado and you've got to keep going west to find Utah and Salt Lake City. And there was a lot of property damage. Okay, and this is our last example. Mars was closest to the Earth, that's the perigee, in December of 1928. This is not weather, but I bring it in because it was an epidemic. And so, so when Mars goes to perigee, you can also look out for a possibility of an epidemic. You wouldn't have been able to predict where, but you could have just noted that there could be some kind of epidemic outbreak. And there was a smallpox epidemic in Hartford, which is the capital of Connecticut, in December of 1928. So he would have, but what was interesting, it was in the month that Mars was closest. So Mars is also part of signature for epidemics. Okay, so our assignment, we're back to like you saw in the predictions in the lecture, those lunar quarters are where the meat, where you're going to find your information. And you can ignore all the other stuff which we would ordinarily use for weddings and hone your focus on the conjunctions and the parallels and any big pattern, like you saw where he noted the faster moving planets heading for an important aspect with the slowers, because that's going to give you timing. So we've got our new moon 6th of October, our first quarter 13th of October, and our full moon 20th. Again, I don't need any backup. I just want your prediction. You can just write it out, what you saw. On this date, something on this date. Yeah, just similar to what he's done. You do have the dates, so try and you can give a date range. You can say, if you can see a whole bunch of planets applying, you only got an 8-day range in there. So yeah, you might want to actually mention each date that there is a conjunction and what that brings. So like if you've got a Sun conjunct Saturn, that's going to cool things down. And you've got to look, is it winter, is it summer, and all the rest. We know we are in spring here in the south, and MJ is in autumn. So relative to the southern spring, or for MJ, the northern autumn, then you interpret that information. And I need that by the 14th of November. Again, it's not for marks. This is just for you guys to have processed the stuff so that you're not sitting at the end of the course in the middle of December when everybody wants to be on holiday and not breaking a sweat about doing 13 lunar quarters in one hit. So we're going to do them step by step. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. And I'm going to close this lecture down so that we've got our recording nice and neat. And then I will send everybody out the link for the Q&A. And it's voluntary, optional if you want to attend or not, up to you. So I'm going to end now so that we can save our recording.